Welcome to the Halloween episode of the podcast. Life is fleeting. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get on with the show.
Before the existence of written records, humans systematized combat. From prehistory and into the modern day, martial arts have been a part of the fabric of culture and civilization. Whether as a means of self-protection, or to wage war, or to compete, or to preserve a tradition, or to touch personal greatness, these codified methods push us to ask questions, to explore, to express, to test, and to tell stories. This is Jamie's Club Podcast, the official podcast of Club Chimera Martial Arts, where we take the path of the vagabond warrior to find knowledge and inspiration from people, events, and ideas. If you are interested in where to follow Jamie Club and Club Chimera products and services, please wait until the end of the show. In the meantime, if you think this product is worth the price of a cup of coffee, please click on Support the Show in this episode's show notes.
The Ballad of Igor, Chapter 3, Determined to Prove a Villain, an Ugly Interlude. One of the defining characteristics of the Igor character is his otherness. This is nearly always represented by a physical deformity, most famously in the form of a hunched back. Whether he is the servile toady, a conniving and vengeful Svengali, a sadistic minion, or a pathetic wooby, the Igor stands outside the more conventionally attractive players in his story. This wasn't more overtly stated than in 1944's House of Frankenstein, where the Igor character was cemented. A cynical sequel to history's first real on-screen example of a character crossover, 1943's Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, the movie's promotional poster boasted Frankenstein's monster, Wolfman, Dracula, Hunchback and Mad Doctor all together. Despite establishing the first cinematic universe, this was something of an empty promise. If cinema goers of the 1940s were hoping for a clash of horror icons, just as I did back in 1986 when the UK's Channel 4 finally showed me most of the golden era horror films I'd only read about for the past 3 years, then they were in for a monstrous disappointment. There was little interaction between the three big hitters, with Boris Karloff's Mad Dr. Gustav Niemann and J. Carrol Naish's Hunchback driving much of the plot. Dracula's story, starring John Carradine, father of David Kung Fu Carradine as the Count, is totally separate and finished by the end of the first act. The monster, this time played by Glenn Strange, is a glorified cameo. The Wolfman, played as always by Lon Chaney Jr., just recycles his previous performance whilst being oblivious to his love triangle subplot. However, it is this subplot that allows Naish's Igor character Daniel to thrive and rise above the Frankenstein's monster of a script that shambles, stumbles and falls down into a dark dungeon of apathetical storytelling. For the first time, we get a semi-tragic Igor. Edward T. Lowe Jr. had been brought in to write the screenplay from an original story by Kurt Siodmak, called Chamber of Horrors. Seeing the success of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which had initially been pitched as a joke, Siodmak had gone full on with the Monster Mash idea, including the Invisible Man, the Mummy and the Mad Ghoul on the roster. Lowe, who broadly straddled the silent and golden era of Hollywood, writing screenplays for 120 films from 1918 to 1947, crudely pillaged at least 2 of his previous horror pictures. From 1933's The Vampire Bat, he made it so that Dracula could only feed when he was a bat, and even plagiarised the film's Mad Doctor villain. Boris Karloff's character even shares the same surname of Lionel Atwell's, Otto von Niemann. However, it is Lowe's co-writing the 1923 silent classic adaptation of Victor Hugo's Gothic novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame, starring Lon Chaney Sr. as a titular hunchback Quasimodo, that portrays much of the genesis of the Daniel character and his entire story. Up to this point, Igor had been played as a straight villain. Lowe and Naish made him a bit more complex. He was still the servile assistant of the Mad Doctor, but his motivations were centred on his perceived ugliness. Naish's only noticeable prosthetic was a hump simulating his severe kyphosis. But the man who had been nominated for an Oscar only a year before and would get nominated a year later, in addition to winning a Golden Globe for his supporting roles, is great at projecting the different sides to his aesthetic disadvantages. Like Quasimodo, Daniel appears to be very able, athletic and very strong. He murders a man with his bare hands early on in the scene that is designed to showcase his status as a type of monster. No makeup is required to accept the campy horror of Naish creeping forward into the camera with his hands menacingly outstretched. Unlike the kind-hearted if complex character of Victor Hugo's novel and Lowe's earlier movie, there is little doubt that Daniel is mainly a villain with inner ugliness that is more than a match for his outer appearance. However, viewers can't help but feel sympathy for him due to his rather blatant elements taken from Quasimodo's story that Naish performs so well. Arriving just outside of Castle Frankenstein, Daniel plays the role of a hero by saving a Romani girl, Ilonka, from being whipped and turning the lash on her abuser. It's something of a reversal of the Notre Dame story, where the Romani girl Esmeralda shows kindness to Quasimodo after he is being publicly lashed. Yet, whereas we might have felt a basic level of sympathy for the simple-minded Daniel being manipulated by the conniving and evil Dr. Nyman that partly mitigated his murderous ways, his gentle love for Ilonka is juxtaposed by his other ugly traits. When Daniel is thrown in the friend zone, he blames his physical appearance and takes his frustrations out on the monster, who is in a severely weakened state, and starts whipping him. The scene not only echoes what we have seen when Daniel rescued Ilonka, but it is a callback to Dwight Frye's fearful and cruel version of the hunchbacked Igor character Fritz in the original 1931 Frankenstein. Like Fritz, Daniel meets his end at the hands of the monster. From the very beginning, Daniel's motivations have been driven by Nyman's promise to give him a new body. The body upgrade trope, common in many Igor stories on from this point, was first introduced through Bela Lugosi's Igor, spelt with a Y, in Ghost of Frankenstein. Whereas that Igor wanted the monster's form to give him superhuman strength to replace his body that had been severely damaged by a botched hanging, this Igor, Daniel, decides he wants the one owned by the Wolfman's alter ego, Lawrence Talbot, who has become the object of Ilonka's love. The idea of the Igor character being sympathetic was carried over onto the film's immediate sequel, the even more cynical and ludicrous House of Dracula. Lowe was brought in again to write the screenplay, which was yet another redevelopment of a previous story idea, this time called Wolfman vs. Dracula, and with various recycled elements from past horror films. Although this time around the Igor character doesn't get much of a subplot, it is worth mentioning for being a refreshingly original take on the trope. The Igor is portrayed as a woman for the first time, a conventionally beautiful actress and model who went by the stage name of Jane Addams. Her character, Nina, is a nurse to a good doctor who has turned mad Jekyll and Hyde fashion due to having his blood contaminated by Dracula. Nina is a totally sympathetic character. She is shown to be sensible and kind. Although it is briefly mentioned that she wishes the doctor to cure her spinal condition, there is no indication or attempt to portray her as ugly beyond this single deformity. Although the Igor stock character has been featured on many ensembles of classic monster icons, most films and media present him as human. Like his earlier influences found in Shakespeare's villainous Richard III and Victor Hugo's Quasimodo, an Igor monstrosity is derived from his ugliness and or disability. Society's adverse relationship with superficial unattractiveness has resulted in serious consequences that deserve to be seen through the lens of self-protection. I knew I'd get there in the end. Lookism, ableism, and other prejudices, sometimes directly associated with actual phobias, has led to various forms of persecution and to a cycle of criminality. Richard III again, reflecting on his own deformity, the then Duke of Gloucester says in the first scene of the first act of Shakespeare's play, quote, "And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover, to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain." End quote. According to neurologist Anjan Chatterjee's research into neuroaesthetics, there are evolutionary drivers behind the reason why, quote, attractive people are regarded as more intelligent, hard-working, trustworthy and warm. They are hired more often, given higher pay, and receive lesser punishments from infractions than their less attractive peers, end quote. According to Chatterjee, this all comes from the aesthetic triad, which is made up of sensory motor, reward emotion, and semantic meaning neural systems. We are attracted to healthier looking people, and although there are nuances created through cultural and societal norms, this is fairly consistent across the board. Writing for the Law Project, Rod Hollier discovered that although conventional views on attractiveness had little effect on judge and jurors' verdicts, they did impact considerably on sentencing. His conclusions included, quote, physical attractiveness had a significant influence on judges' sentencing. The more unattractive the criminal, the higher the sentence, or conversely, the more attractive the criminal, the lower the sentence. The results of 3 studies show a minimum increase of 119.25% and a maximum increase of 304.88%, end quote. And in alignment with Chatterjee's findings, quote, generally attractive people are perceived as more intelligent, more socially skilled, more appealing personalities, more moral, more altruistic, more likely to succeed, more hireable as managers, and more competent. Attractive people tend to have better physical health, better mental health, better dating experiences, earn more money, obtain higher career positions, chosen for jobs more often, promoted more often, receive better job evaluations, and chosen as business partners more often than unattractive people, end quote. Perhaps one might argue a lot of this becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Unless they are blessed with other compensatory attributes that provide advantages elsewhere, less attractive people might find themselves in more desperate circumstances. Add into this, those who suffer abuse are more likely to abuse others, and it is small wonder that other research would inspire the newspaper headline, "Ugly people more likely to commit crimes, study shows." The media are only too keen to pick up on this idea and reinforce the bias. The murderous cat burglar turned murderous stalker Charles Charlie Frederick Peace might have titillated Victorian England with his acrobatic thievery, his mastery of disguise and his daring attempted escapes from custody, but ultimately they were repulsed by the otherness of the man. His unique physical features made for a celebrated and obvious attraction in the Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors section of the Wax Museum. Even his highly questionable transformation into a working-class anti-hero might be seen through the lens of pity due to his physical grotesquerie. Photographs taken at the time of his final arrest testify to the elastic qualities of Peace's face that was partly the result of having his jaw broken at one point of his tumultuous life. He looks like he could have put competitive gurning on his long list of disparate skills, but instead his talent was deftly used to evade the police when he went on the run. So good was his ability to contort his face and his use of makeup and hair dye that the police claimed he could even fool his own relatives. Monkey similes rather than the usual toads that we associate with Igor characters cluster around Charlie Peace. Photographs taken of him show Peace's bulbous, bald, elongated forehead terminating in a simian-like brow. However, the likeness did not end there. Small in stature, standing no more than 5'4", he had an enormous amount of wiry strength and was extremely agile. 1926's The Trials of Charles Frederick Peace, edited by William Tenmouth Shaw, describes different incidents where Peace demonstrated his combative ability. He put 2 muggers in hospital. When a contemporary of his, described as a large burly farmer, accused Peace of selling him a faulty watch and attacked him, Peace deposited the man in a pond and the farmer had to be rescued from drowning. Nevertheless, even when he wasn't using his skills as a master of disguise, Peace's natural features, including his prematurely greying back and side hair, made him look much older than his actual years. When a notice was put out for his arrest for murder, he was described as being between 55 and 60, despite being only 44 at the time. Add into this mix his diminutive size and the fact that he walked with an unusual tittering gait, was missing a finger, some have said 2, from his left hand and, according to his wanted poster, spoke, quote, somewhat peculiarly as though his tongue were too large for his mouth, end quote, and we can understand why crime historian Martin Fido, recording in 1998, described Peace to be possessing of a hobgoblin malignity. One of his victims, an object of his obsession, who Peace claimed had been his lover, described him as a demon, quote, beyond the power of even a Shakespeare to paint, end quote. It's not that Peace just happened to be a criminal who was born with unaesthetic looks compounded by unfortunate accidents. His ugliness just seemed to conform to writer Roald Dahl's view on the condition that he echoed in his children's novel The Twits. Peace's ugly egocentric traits of entitlement, greed, spite and predatory opportunism just seemed to exude out of him in the form of a repellent physical caricature. William Shaw would also add that Peace, quote, possessed every gift that goes to make the complete criminal. He was a liar, braggart and actor, conceited, cunning, lecherous, malignant, without conscience, and as every murderer is, remorseless, end quote. Shaw went on to describe him as, quote, almost a monkey of a man, cunning, cruel, and absolutely selfish, in short, an unrestrained savage, end quote. Peace, for his part, prided himself on being determined to get anything he put his mind to acquiring, and never leaving a slight unpunished. Such personality traits which he and his closest family members made public knowledge would prove to be deadly truths amidst his slew of shameless boasting. Charlie Peace led an extraordinary life. Small wonder that he would catch the attention of so many writers. His criminal career lasted 3 decades, beginning in the early 1850s and ending in 1879 when he faced the gallows. It consisted of waves of cat burglaries in Manchester, Sheffield, Hull, Southampton, North Portsmouth, Southsea, Nottingham and London, stints in prison, ambitious yet failed attempts to escape from the law, including jumping from a moving train after his last apprehension, a reputation for fighting arresting officers, wounding a couple and eventually killing another, and the murder of the husband of one of his fixations. His daring escape attempts and evasions of the police made him into something of a folk hero by the time of his execution. This was ensured by an anonymously written penny dreadful on his life that was serialised over hundreds of issues from the year of his death to 1880 and then collected into a huge volume called Charles Peace, or The Adventures of a Notorious Cat Burglar. Less than a century later, the English comic book Buster, published by Fleetway Publications, ran a strip called The Astounding Adventures of Charlie Peace from 1964 until 1974. Peace was depicted as a lovable rogue who evaded capture from the police, but whose crimes would always go awry. The artist even eschewed his unusual looks, which Victorian illustrators and cartoonists had enthusiastically embraced. Compared to the existing photos of Peace, he'd never looked better. The tragedy of Charlie Peace is that his story could have been one about overcoming adversity. Like his father John, Charles had not allowed serious injuries to get in his way. John Peace had lost the lower part of his leg in a mining accident and yet had gone on to become a successful wild animal trainer at Wanwell's famous menagerie. John retired after the premature death of his eldest son and gone on to become a shoemaker, settling down in Sheffield. Charlie Peace had lost a kneecap aged just 14 when he was apprenticed at a steel rolling mill. Later he incurred an injury to his left hand. Accounts vary on this one. Some say he lost 1 finger, others that he lost 2, and one even says he lost 3 fingers. Photographs appear to indicate he had at least 2 remaining digits. Peace used to say he lost them in a fight, but there's a strong suspicion it was down to an accident with his favourite weapon, the revolver. Needless to say, these disfigurements along with his rubbery simian looks lent to his Igorish appearance. He did not suffer from a spinal deformity, but his tittering gait led at least one witness to describe his posture as stooped. He was an intelligent, talented musician who played a single-string fiddle as well as various other instruments and was a driven individual who was very capable of helping others and his local community. His handiwork was varied and inventive. He even fancied himself as an inventor and applied for patents. There were multiple examples best served in a different podcast on his life that would demonstrate his ability to live a productive existence. This was no poverty-stricken individual who turned to crime out of sheer desperation. He was given multiple chances throughout his life at redemption. Peace's downfall and the full extent of his crimes was revealed after he was arrested on the 10th of October 1878. The notorious portico thief, as he was often referred to at different times throughout his criminal career, had not come quietly. When later romancing writers described the artistry of his escapes, combining ingenuity, inventiveness, acrobatics and his trademark audacity, they often missed out his readiness to deliver violence. Caught fleeing out of the garden window of a house in St John's Park, in his current regular hunting ground of Blackheath, Peace was intercepted on the lawn by Police Constable Edward Robinson. Charlie might have been agile and strong, but missing a kneecap didn't make him an especially fast runner, so he resorted to his all-too-familiar backup, the revolver. He shouted a warning, "Keep off, or by God I will shoot you!" Robinson replied, "You better not," and continued to move forward. Charlie fired off 3 shots that zipped by the police officer's head. As he lunged for Peace, the burglar fired a 4th shot, which also missed. Now in a clinch, Peace was heard to cry, "You bugger! I will settle you this time." The 5th shot caught Robinson in the right arm, but it did little to slow him down. Instead, he disarmed Peace and threw him to the ground before pistol whipping him with his own revolver. Peace wasn't finished yet and cried, "You bugger! I'll give you something else," and according to Robinson, went for his knife. However, by this time, Sergeant Charles Brown and Police Constable William Girling were on the scene. The 3 overpowered him. A second attempt at escape by Peace resulted in Girling knocking him unconscious with his truncheon. If arresting Peace had been a challenge, then it might have been seen as a mere preliminary trial to the lengthy task of uncovering his identity. A life spent mainly in and out of prison, getting caught, narrowly escaping, and being on the run had resulted in an individual who had become the very embodiment of evasiveness. He sat in his cell responding to questions regarding his identity like a sulky Victorian Rumpelstiltskin, demanding that the arresting officers found out for themselves. Unmasking this culprit was a process of slowly peeling back several layers. Such an expression wasn't entirely metaphorical, given that Peace had dyed his skin and hair, leading him to be described as being of mixed race in his arrest report. The first layer came off when Peace reached out to a certain would-be inventor called Henry Brion. An industrious man, unconnected to criminal activity, Brion had attended a meeting along with a certain John Thompson to speak to Samuel Plimsoll, MP in the House of Commons, to discuss patenting an invention for raising sunken vessels by the displacement of water within the vessel by air and gases. Brion received a letter written with exaggerated illiteracy signed by a John Ward, begging for the man to have mercy on a poor unfortunate who had got into trouble due to the sins of drink. Curious why the stranger would write to him, Brion turned up at Newgate Prison only to immediately recognise his co-inventor, a man he knew to be John Thompson. However, if Peace thought he could somehow use Brion to help him, as he had done so many others in his life, he was woefully mistaken. Henry was quick to connect the dots back home. He was aware that there had been a sudden upheaval at Peace's home in Peckham. This was the latest residence Peace had set up, along with a dysfunctional family consisting of a woman he called his wife, but was in fact his live-in mistress, Mrs. Susan Bailey, along with his lawful wife, Hannah Peace, and her son by another marriage, William. At different times, Hannah and William had been either consigned to the basement of the living house or in an adjoining house. During his time in the London area, Peace had done everything he could to cultivate the appearance of an eccentric middle-class gentleman. The house was filled with musical instruments, exotic furnishings, and a virtual menagerie of animals that included different species of parrots, as well as rabbits, dogs and cats. Peace had become a popular figure in his local neighbourhood. He'd charmed the landlord into letting him rent the property without references and build a stable for his pony and trap by inviting him over for dinner. Soirees at the Thompson residence became a regular feature. Peace enjoyed putting on musical performances with his fiddle and sung popular ballads, while Susan accompanied him on the piano. He regularly preached on religion in conversation, attended every Sunday service, and always ended his night of entertaining at 10 p.m. prompt. He said this was down to his ill health, and it also nicely aligned with his piety. What he didn't say, of course, was that it provided him with enough night hours to continue his burgling. Henry Brion knew that Susan, Hannah and Willie had all fled carrying several boxes just recently, and he had no compunction about telling the police this information. Susan, who had long been a liability in the Peace household largely due to her drunkenness and described herself as, quote-unquote, not a sentimental sort, took little persuading to spill the beans on John Ward, aka John Thompson, aka One-Armed Jemmy, aka the Portico Thief, aka the wanted murderer Charles Frederick Peace. However, her hopes of claiming any of the reward money were dashed due to her witness statement not being linked to his arrest. Hannah and Willie were tracked down in Sheffield, where they were also arrested, although Willie did not go to trial and Hannah was acquitted. Peace stuck to the John Ward name and put in one of his famous performances at the Old Bailey. He appeared as a 60-year-old man who displayed signs of senility, when in reality he was only 46 and as agile-minded as he had ever been. His defence was that he didn't know his revolver was loaded and had only used it to frighten P.C. Robinson, not to kill him. Standing before the judge, he again adopted a pathetic posture, pleading before God for forgiveness. He was found guilty of burglary and attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. At the time of Hannah's arrest, one of the boxes was opened to reveal Peace's burglary kit, which remains on display to this day at the Black Museum located at New Scotland Yard. The kit included the collapsible ladder he created for quick access to rooftops and an artificial arm. This device had been used as part of his many disguises to hide his distinctive hand with a missing digit or digits. However, it had also been suggested that Peace used it to aid him in his burglaries. This was the man who had been the scourge across the country, from Hull to London. But the story did not stop here. With the concealing identities of John Ward and Jack Thompson torn off and cast aside, the police were now left with Charles Peace, a wanted murderer. Back in early 1872, Peace had left prison after serving yet another lengthy stay for burgling as an apparently changed man. The seemingly repentant Charlie penned a poem whilst inside mourning the death of his infant son and reaffirming his Christian faith. Moving into the village of Darnall in Sheffield, Peace had settled down with Hannah, his stepson, his daughter and son-in-law and started a business as a picture framer. He'd established his reputation as a religious man after declaring he would attend every Sunday service to the newly appointed vicar, a former prison chaplain, Reverend J. H. Littlewood, and even became a regular leader in Bible school. Sanctimonious villains were already a cliché in fiction at this point, from Shakespeare's Angelo to Molière's Tartuffe to Austen's William Collins, and yet they remain a persistent criminal behaviour in the real world. However, this time, it would not be Peace's professional criminality that would emerge from below the surface of the apparent newfound public respectability. Rather, it would be his dogged and narcissistic belief that when he set his sights on getting something, he would not be deterred. It wasn't long before the quote-unquote ugly little picture framer had ingratiated himself with a couple living but one house down from his street, in a relationship that would quickly turn toxic. The story of Charles Peace and the Dysons is a classic self-protection lesson and cautionary tale in what can happen when normal people become involved with truly malicious criminals. Arthur Dyson, working for the North Eastern Railway, was married to Kate, several years his junior. The two had moved to Darnall 1 year prior to the Peaces, having previously lived in the USA for several years. Dyson engaged Peace's services to frame some family pictures. Clearly with his eyes on Kate, Charlie began imposing his personality on the couple. Standing at 6'5", extremely thin, and with a quiet, gentlemanly manner, Arthur Dyson could not have been more different than Charlie Peace. Dyson was a mild-mannered, middle-class representative of a respected profession, one of the oldest professions in engineering history. Peace was a serial offending ex-con who had spent at least half his life inside prison with a known violent temper. So contrasting was the sight of the upright gentle giant and the crouched brash old bruiser walking together that some unkind locals would refer to them as the organ grinder and his monkey. It was unsurprising that Arthur and Charlie's friendship would not last. According to Kate, he would regularly turn up at meal times unannounced and generally pester the couple. He took full advantage of acts of common courtesy to invade their evenings and tag along on nights out. Finally, Charlie's crudeness butted up hard against Arthur Dyson's genteel manner. He showed Mr. Dyson some obscene photographs and invited him out for a night on the town, bringing civilities between them to an abrupt end. Dyson was totally disgusted by the man, and he no longer answered his door to him when he came calling. By the end of June 1876, Arthur threw a card into the Peace Garden. The card's message was a single line: quote, "Charles Peace is requested not to interfere with my family," end quote. If the couple thought this was an end to their problems, they were in for a rude awakening. Peace, who argued to his dying day he was Kate's lover, was not going to cease visiting their home. A photograph that Charlie said proved he was in a relationship with Kate seems to have been little more than Peace photobombing an occasion. There was later talk of the Dysons having regular marital problems even before they met Peace. Through the lens of Anglo-centric Victorianism, Kate Dyson's total denial of a relationship with Peace was not always believed. She stated that all the examples Peace gave of him appearing with her in public were instances of his continued harassment. Incriminating letters that would become a central point made by Peace, proving that he and Kate were romantically involved, were determined to be inconclusive. Later, when Kate produced 2 samples of her handwriting at Peace's trial, the judge told the defence counsel he'd done enough to discredit Mrs. Dyson. Regardless of the extent or existence of this relationship, Peace became the neighbour from hell. Speaking to the Sheffield Inquirer, Kate said, quote, "We couldn't get rid of him," end quote. According to Kate, he would wait outside their locked door and listen through the keyhole. He would jump over the wall with the intention to annoy the couple. She explained, he would come and stand outside the window at night and look in, leering all the while. She added, he had a way of creeping and crawling about and of coming upon you suddenly unawares. Finally, 2 instances convinced Arthur to contact the police. Peace tried to trip Arthur up in the street, and when he next saw Kate discussing the matter in public, he produced 2 of his trusty revolvers and declared, quote, "I will blow your bloody brains out, and your husband's too," end quote. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and Peace fled with his family 50 miles northeast to Hull. Here Hannah was set up as a supervisor of an eating shop. Peace decided to return to his burgling ways, but he was far from done with the Dysons. Using his son-in-law, William Bolsover, as a contact still living in Darnall, Peace was kept abreast of the couple's goings-on. Between thieving sprees across Manchester and Sheffield, Peace would return to Darnall, often in disguise. He once even dressed as a woman. The Dysons knew they could only rely on police protection and made a decision to move. However, they hadn't reckoned on Peace's informant. One day, Bolsover noticed a furniture van outside the Dysons' home. He tracked it through Sheffield along Eccleshall Road when who should he meet but his father-in-law. Like the big bad wolf from Little Red Riding Hood, Peace made his way to his prey's destination ahead of them. On the day the Dysons arrived at their new home, Peace walked out their front door and announced, "You see, I'm here to annoy you wherever you go." Dyson reminded him about the warrant, but Charlie said he didn't care about the warrant or the police, and sauntered off to Gregory's, the nearby grocer's, to buy some tobacco. Matters came to a tragic head on the night of the 29th of November 1876. Having put their 5-year-old son to bed and leaving her husband reading in his armchair, Kate Dyson went to the outside toilet. Upon leaving the outhouse, she was met by her tormentor. Peace was armed with a revolver, and the shock prompted Mrs. Dyson to scream. Alerted to the commotion, Arthur hurried out of the rear door just in time to see Peace disappear down the passageway and cross the forecourt to some steps. Seeing his pursuer emerge from the passageway, Charlie opened fire. The first shot hit the lintel of the passageway door. For all his tolerance and quiet, genteel manner, Arthur appears to have come to the end of his tether with the little gremlin. He was undeterred and moved forward. However, Peace was not to be caught. According to his testimony, there had been a struggle, but according to Kate's testimony and the subsequent forensic evidence, Charlie's second shot was too far away. This was the shot that struck Arthur in the temple and proved to be fatal. Running from Kate's cries of, "Murder! You shot my husband!" Charles Peace ran across the road, cleared a garden wall and disappeared into a field. In doing so, he dropped his packet of more than 20 messages he claimed were written by Kate and Mr. Dyson's card requesting Peace stay away from Arthur's family. And so had commenced the 2 storied years of Peace's final days as a cat burglar, where he had acquired his live-in mistress, led a double life and moved from one end of the country to the other. Following his first hearing for the murder of Arthur Dyson, the case was adjourned for the second hearing and Peace was transported back to London. On his journey back to Sheffield, he demonstrated one last act of audacity that defined his criminal career. He attempted to jump from the moving train. Reports differ, with the romantics portraying the handcuffed felon leaping from the carriage only to knock himself unconscious. More sober accounts just say Charlie tried to break free with the intention of jumping off the train, but was successfully restrained. Regardless of what really happened, Charles Peace was deemed fit to stand trial. The event became a media circus, and much was made by Peace and his defence counsel that the press interest would prejudice the jury. This was to no avail. It took the jury just 10 minutes to conclude that Peace had not merely been defending himself from Arthur Dyson and was guilty of murder. He would be hung on the 25th of February 1879 by William Marwood, the inventor of the faster and arguably more humane method of execution known as the long drop. Demonstrating the complexities of human beings, prior to his death, Peace undertook one act of kindness. He confessed to the murder of Police Constable Nicholas Cock on the 1st of August 1876. Peace had a history of violently resisting arrest, aided by his revolvers. Early in his career, he had almost killed one of two police officers who had ambushed him on the 12th of August 1859. A similar episode had been replayed in his final arrest in Blackheath with PC Edward Robinson. However, prior to the murder of Arthur Dyson, when he had been on the run for harassing the couple and had restarted his burgling, Nicholas Cock had followed Peace into the grounds of a house he was targeting at Whalley Range, Manchester. Charlie had tried to warn him off with his revolver. The constable, known for moving towards threats, was undeterred. Much like Arthur Dyson, Charlie fired off a warning shot. This only prompted the officer to draw his truncheon. Fearing he would be deported this time due to his string of previous offences, Peace let fly the final shot. With the only description of the suspect being a man wearing a brown coat, a pot hat, and, in line with our Igor theme, walking with a stoop, a local farm labourer, William Habron, was arrested and found guilty of the crime. Habron was a burly 22-year-old at the top of his local pecking order. He was quick to fight, and needed to in order to preserve his position. This meant he was an obvious antagonist to Nicholas Cock, an enthusiastic and ambitious police officer just 1 year his senior. Cock had regularly intervened in Habron's skirmishes, warning him several times that he'd have him up in front of the magistrates, and then finally arresting him. However, on the occasion that Habron did face the magistrate, he had been found not guilty. Providing us with yet another cautionary tale in self-protection, Habron had been arrested and charged not for what he had done but because of his reputation. It had been a clear case of self-defence. William, it seems, had heeded Cock's warning and spent a week being careful not to get into fights. Unfortunately, this change of attitude had been perceived as an act of weakness by someone who wished to challenge his place in the young male pecking order. Habron had been attacked and Cock had arrived on the scene as he was defending himself. Despite this vindication, the top dog of Deacon Farm was so incensed by what he had seen as a campaign of persecution by the young constable that he had publicly sworn to get him back. This is what the senior officer at the site of Nicholas Cock's corpse had decided had happened. Gathering circumstantial evidence, the case was made and William Habron was sentenced to death. However, lucky for Habron, the jury had recommended mercy, and 2 days before his appointment with the hangman, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Like the serial killer Reginald Halliday Christie, who would watch as Timothy Evans would be sentenced to death for the murder of his wife and child, crimes later revealed to be Christie's doing, Charlie Peace ensured he was present at Habron's trial. In fact, if the story is to be believed, he was quite vocal about his presence, declaring, as he made his way to the front of the crowd of spectators, quote, "I came all the way from Sheffield to see this trial," end quote. Why Peace had decided to let Habron off is unclear. Perhaps he did fear the eternal torments of hell described to him by the prison chaplain, or maybe he wanted to ensure his criminal career was remembered in its entirety. Peace would claim that he had hoped people would soon forget about him, but given the way he courted attention throughout his life, that wish does not seem to be genuine. What obvious lessons can we draw from this Igor of criminal history? Well, from a tactical perspective, it's not advisable to rush someone pointing a firearm in your direction. Be wary of the individuals that come into your life and set your boundaries early. Many criminals have learned they can take full advantage of common courtesies and kindnesses. Watch out for those who impose themselves on you or others. They will be audacious in the extreme to get their proverbial or literal foot in the door. However, there's still something more to be said about ugliness. Although it's undeniable that Peace was a skillful person, there's something about his life that screams overcompensator. He rarely occupied a pub or public gathering without trying to command attention, through his musical abilities or tricks or sermonising. Disguising himself so well and often going to extremes might have aided him in his criminal career, but one wonders how much was born out of his desire to simply look different. Likewise, philandering and ill treatment of partners have been correlated with insecurity, and a lack of security regarding physical appearance can contribute to this behaviour, particularly in men who may feel the need for external validation. The link is often through insecurity manifesting itself as a need for constant validation, where seeking new partners is a way to reaffirm a sense of self-worth or power. Superficiality is not just a sin of the uncultured and unsophisticated, it's a driving force in prejudice. Prejudice in itself can be found at the core of some of the least sympathetic criminal acts. On a macrocosmic level, we see it in systems of oppression and wholesale genocide, yet we have evolved to be suspicious of differences for good reason. When our base level of anything becomes disrupted, it's important to take notice from a self-protection perspective. It's also wise to be mindful of our instincts and intuition. However, we also need to be self-aware of irrational discrimination at any level. When considering outward appearances, it might be worth referencing my Prince Charming Offensive podcast episode and consider such notoriously brutal criminals like serial killer Paul the Casanova Killer Knowles and the sadistic Romeo Neville Heath, both known for their conventional good looks. There are many physical appearance myths that many people still cling on to, if not on an intellectual level, then as something that seems like a deep-rooted instinct. The Hamlin Book of Facts and Fallacies was my first official book on critical thinking. It was a 10th birthday present. Interestingly, a number of the supposed fallacies have since been debunked in their own right, which just goes to show the unique and fluid nature of science as more knowledge is accumulated. Anyway, one chapter was dedicated to the mind and body, and the first myth it debunked was one in the eye for many of us budding fiction writers. Your face does not reveal your character. The brief section ends with a description of an exercise frequently used in psychology lessons where a teacher mixes up pictures of criminals with judges, police officers and members of the clergy and asks the students to pick out the offenders. Invariably, they fail to make the right choice. I've used a similar test in self-protection seminars using less common photos of notorious criminals and individuals famed for their kindly nature. Prolific sadistic serial killer and rapist Ted Bundy is often voted as a person to trust. Meanwhile, many thought the famous icon for peace and non-violent resistance to oppression, Mahatma Gandhi, looked untrustworthy in a photograph taken of him during his time in the legal profession. Future Jamie here, and I just thought I would mention that there is some correlations between physical appearance and personality traits. There's been some interesting studies on these, but they're not wholly reliable by any extent, and mere curiosities. For the most part, we shouldn't judge a person on their appearance, even if there are certain correlations between things like size of a person's jaw in relation to perceived dominance and that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just way too complex, and just again, a lot of it just feeds back into this whole beauty bias with the fact that a person looks a certain way, therefore they might be treated a certain way, and therefore they might act in a certain way. But again, it's all very interesting stuff. But as I go on to say, our personal security heuristics should not be determined by an individual's appearance. In the short term, this can be dangerous. In the long term, it can be even worse, helping to perpetuate the beauty bias that reinforces an unfair society where criminality becomes a more attractive option to those not blessed with looks that society currently deems to be aesthetically pleasing. Thank you for listening. Please hang around after these messages for some important information about the upcoming podcasts. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're so inclined, there are many ways you can express your support and help keep this podcast going. For example, I've published several books on Amazon. If you'd like a signed copy of any of them, please drop me an email. You can also purchase my online Vagabond Warriors martial arts cross-training courses and the online Animal Instincts Children's Self-Protection Teaching Program. More direct support can be shown through Buy Me a Coffee and my Patreon page. I'm most grateful to all those who have already bought my books and courses and those who continue to kindly donate to the show. As for my services, the heart of all that is CCMA, nowadays I teach private lessons, courses and seminars. These are bespoke services that put you in charge of your martial arts journey. I teach self-protection and martial arts cross-training. You can train with me, one-to-one, or in a small group. I count individual clients, couple clients, parent and child clients, and various other combinations. These can be taught face-to-face or virtually. I also regularly teach clubs, societies and associations nationally and internationally. Please go to clubchimera.com for more details. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you are currently using. If you could leave me a 5-star rating and a review, I would be most grateful. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, X and TikTok. Facebook also has a members group in addition to the main business page, so please send in a request to join in with the training discussions and be a part of the wider CCMA community. I'm also uploading new content to YouTube. There are various shorts, vlogs and full video versions of some of these podcast episodes on there. Again, please subscribe, like, share and leave a comment. All favourable engagement helps keep CCMA moving forward. So the news on the new podcast is that I have none planned for the rest of 2025. This episode is the official end to Season 8. Usually these shows are run to Christmas and then the new season begins in the new year, but that did not happen this year and it's getting increasingly difficult to deliver on deadlines. Therefore I thought the Halloween show would be an appropriate finale episode to this season, which will give me more time to better plan for Season 9. Now, I'm not saying there won't be impromptu shows, but should they come out, please consider them to be bonus episodes. I want to deliver the Muay Thai episode, the end of The Way of the Vulture, the next part of the Ballad of Igor, various different interviews and discussions with guests on here, and many other titles we've discussed over the past 3 or 4 years. But commitments this end are making it difficult to deliver now. So let's look forward to Season 9 in 2026, and for now, happy Halloween, Christmas and New Year. I look forward to seeing and hearing from you all again very soon.